Okay, you want to start the presentation? Right, okay. Now, although this is, well, not so much, although this is about Revelation 12, we're not actually starting there today. We're going to start in the Gospel of Luke, where we find numerous clues as to when our Messiah was born. So, going to Luke chapter 1, and we'll read verses 5, 8 through 9, and 11 to 13. In the days of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah of the division of Abijah. Remember the division of Abijah. Now, while he was serving as priest before God, when his division was on duty, according to the custom of the priesthood, it fell on him by lot to enter the temple of the Lord and burn incense. Going down to verse 11, there appeared to him an angel of the Lord standing on the right side of the altar of incense. And Zechariah was troubled when he saw him, and fear fell on him. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer is heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you shall call his name Yochanan." Now, after Zechariah's time in the temple, his ministry cycle was finished, he went back to his home, and his wife Elizabeth conceived. So if we go down to verses 23 and 24, right? So when his time of service was ended, he went to his home. After these days, Elizabeth conceived, and for 5 months she kept herself hidden, saying, "Thus the Lord has done for me in the days when he looked on me to take away my reproach among the people." 6 months later, the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary, announcing to her that she would conceive and bear a son to be named Yeshua. So Luke 1, 26 through 31. Next slide. Yep. In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from God to a city of Galilee named Nazareth, to a virgin betrothed to a man whose name was Joseph, of the house of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. And he came to her and said, "Greetings, O favoured one, the Lord is with you." But she was greatly troubled at the saying, and tried to discern what sort of greeting this might be. And the angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favour with God. And behold, you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you will call his name Yeshua." Hence, Yeshua was born about 6 months after Yochanan the Immerser, otherwise known as John the Baptist. Now, you remember I said to you to keep in mind this reference to the division of Abijah that we first read. So if we were to go over to 1 Chronicles, which I don't have a slide for, right, we find that the priestly duty cycles were divided into 24 divisions, 16 for the descendants of Eleazar and 5 for the descendants of Ithamar. Each division was determined by casting lots, and the 8th division fell to Abijah. Each division served for 1 week at a time, with changes from one division to the next being made on the Sabbath. Hence, each division ministered twice a year. And the cycle for each year's divisions began on 22nd of Tishri, and all the divisions served at the 3 great feasts, Pesach, Passover, Shavuot, weeks, and Sukkot, tabernacles. The dates for the 2 yearly ministrations of Abijah worked out as the 12th to 18th of Kislev and 12th to 18th of Sivan. Now, going back to what we read in Luke, Elizabeth didn't conceive the day that Zechariah's temple service ended. Right? Luke 1:24 says it occurred after these days. Also, Luke 1:39-40 tells us that their home was in a city in the hill country, so we've got to allow a few days travel for Zechariah to get back home as well. So the 6th month of Luke 1:26 is only an approximation, and in any event, Mary's pregnancy may not have lasted exactly the typical 40 weeks. So far from the information we have, Yeshua, the Messiah, was probably born about 15 to 16 months after Zechariah's ministrations finished. If he was ministering in Kislev, that would put the 15 to 16 months later in Adar or Nisan, or around March of our year. If it was in Sivan, then the 15 to 16 months would fall in Elul or Tishri, around our September. Now, both Luke and Matthew mention Yeshua's birth as occurring in the days of King Herod the Great. Now, in what follows, I'm going to be referring to various dates from both the Julian and Hebrew calendars. I've already mentioned a few Hebrew calendar dates. And the Julian calendar dates related to Julius in this period are a few days out from our Gregorian calendar dates, which we use these days. Now, the Jewish historian Josephus tells us that Herod's death occurred in the period between a lunar eclipse and the following Passover. He also tells us that Herod reigned for 37 years from the time of his appointment in 40 BCE and for 34 years from his conquest of Jerusalem in 37 BCE. Since it's generally assumed that Herod's reign ended with his death, the lunar eclipse of the 13th of March 4 BCE, which was the 14th of Adar 3757, is the one that Josephus is referring to. And it's on that basis that it's often concluded in academic circles and lots of popular literature that Jesus was actually born in 4 BCE, meaning that our calendars are actually out by 4 years. But is that conclusion correct? Yeah. So at the time of this lunar eclipse, Herod was already ill. He knew he was dying. Right? Josephus tells us that between the lunar eclipse and the following Passover, right, okay, next slide, right. Herod travelled from Jericho to the hot springs at Kalirho to be treated for his ailments, and then back again to Jericho. He ordered all the important men throughout Judea to come to Jericho under pain of death, right? And had to wait for that order to be fulfilled. 5 days before he died, Herod executed Antipater, his co-regent, or former co-regent, and he was buried and mourned for at least 7 days, and that there was another 7-day post-burial mourning period to mourn Matthias and his companions, whom Herod had also executed. Now, between the eclipse of the 13th of March and the following Passover, which fell on 12 April 4 BCE, or 15 Nisan 3757, there was only 29 days. And the sick and dying Herod had to fit all that activity into the period between the lunar eclipse and his death. It's pretty tight for 29 days. The next lunar eclipses visible in Judea didn't occur until 1 BCE, on the 10th of January, or 15 Shavat, 3760, and 29 December, 13 Tebet, 3761. Now, the first of these was a total eclipse, but it occurred just after midnight. Hardly anybody would have noticed it. The one on 29 December, though, was much more substantial than the one from 4 BC, when people think that happened, with the moon rising at about 5:45, and the eclipse peaked a few minutes later before fading at around 6. Because it was in the umbral shadow of the Earth, it appeared red, which would have made it even more spectacular. Right? And so it's the one that's most likely than the one from 4 BCE to have been observed and commented on. Next slide. Yep, okay, so if the partial eclipse of 29 December is the one that Josephus referred to, then Herod died between then and Pesach on 15 Nisan 3761 or 29 March, 1 CE now. And this fits Luke's description of Yeshua being about 30 years old when he began his ministry, Luke 3:23, whereas the 4 BCE date would make Jesus already about 34. Unless one argues that Jesus actually started his ministry 4 years earlier also. But Luke 3:1-2 says that Yochanan's ministry began in the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar, which was around 29. So Jesus can't have been ministering in 26. So how does one reconcile the date of 1 BCE with the recorded end of Herod's reign in 37-year reign in 4 BCE? The answer lies in Herod's fall from grace in 4 BCE when Caesar Augustus removed his title as Caesar's friend, that's what he was called up until then, and relegated him to subject status. Thus, his reign ended with his in disgrace, not with death. Right, 4 years before he had Antipater executed. Now, Antipater's co-regency then passed on to Antipas, right, before Herod added Archelaus, and Philip as tetrarchs over parts of Palestine. And all three, right, so that's Antipas, Archelaus, and Philip seem to have antedated the dates of their reigns. And Josephus refers to Archelaus as the one who had long exercised royal authority when he assumed power in his own right. And what adds weight to this is that all three of those, right, Archelaus, Antipas, and Philip, the earliest known coins for any of them is for year 5 of their reign. The first 4 years are missing. Right, so that would be consistent with 1 CE being the first effective year of their reign, but their 5th legal year. Because they really didn't want to perhaps risk being executed by Herod claiming that they were the official rulers when he was still around. There's further evidence for the for a date after 4 BCE in Josephus, who says that less than a year before Herod died, over 6,000 Pharisees refused to pledge their goodwill to Caesar. The fact that this number was recorded and they were fined suggests that their oath of allegiance was required at the time of the census. And that could have been the census required that's referred to in Luke 2:1, right? When the Roman Senate bestowed the title of Pater Patriae, Father of the Country, on Caesar Augustus, right, which is in 5 February 2 BCE. Right? Easier to make the administration of the oath and a census happen at the same time. So, going back to Luke 1, if Herod died between 29 December 1 BCE, which is 13 Tebet 3761, and 27 March, right, the next Passover, 1 CE, 15 Nisan 3761, then given that Yeshua was 6 months younger than Yochanan, Zechariah's angelic visitation and Elizabeth's conception of Yochanan cannot have occurred after 2 BCE. In fact, for the narrative in Luke 2 and Matthew 2 to play out before Herod died, right, you'd need a lot more time. Things like the slaughter of the innocents and all that kind of stuff. So it seems more likely than not that the delay between Zechariah's angelic visitation and Elizabeth's conception of Jochanan didn't span a later period. It also seems likely that Luke 1, 5 and 8 to 9 refers to Zechariah's ministry period ending on 18 Kislev 3764, 15 November 2 BCE. So turning over to Revelation 12, we find John saying, "A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. She was with child, and she cried out in her pangs of birth, in anguish for delivery." Going down to verse 5, she brought forth a male child, one who's to rule the nations with a rod of iron. Now, that description is, there's no question, it's applied to the Messiah in both Psalm 2, verses 7 to 9, and Revelation 19, which we'll get to in the coming weeks, verses 11 to 16. Now, the woman in this case need not literally be either Yeshua's mother, Israel, or the church. John describes it as nothing more than a sign in the heavens. Now, I take it to be the state of the sky when Yeshua was born. It just so happens that soon after sunset on 16 September 1 BCE, which is 28 Elul, 3761, the sun was in the constellation of Virgo, in other words, clothing Virgo, in a rare conjunction with the new moon, which was under her feet, right, and Jupiter, the king. 2 days later, can we go to the next slide? Yeah. Okay, so that's from an astronomy program I've got, showing where the sun and the moon are with Virgo. Of course, this would all be the state of the sky in daytime, but I've hidden the day lights here so you can actually see what's going on. And so we have the sun in Virgo, the moon at Virgo's feet, right? So Virgo's upside down. It's the figure of the woman, right, outlined. Upside down, an upside down woman, sort of on the side. Right, yeah, you can see where the head is there. Yeah. I mean, I could turn it around, but it sort of looks a bit funny if the horizon is up in the sky. Right, so she's nearly standing on her head. Okay, so we have the sun in Virgo, the moon is at her feet. Right. Right. And so this is the state of the sky on what. Yeah, this one keeps moving. Sorry. So this is the state of the sky. Right, okay. Okay, so this is the state of the sky. I put on 1 Tishri 3761. All right. We have the moon below Virgo's feet. 18 September on the Julian date, all right? Which is 16 September in our date. Okay, so 1 Tishri is Rosh Hashanah, I mean the head of the year, otherwise known as Yom Teruah. A lot of you will remember us celebrating that last year, literally the day of shouting or blasting. It's also celebrated by the sounding of the shofar, as we did, and is the day on which King David became King of Judah. It's also the traditional Jewish anniversary of the creation of Adam and Eve. How strange that our Messiah might actually be born then. So the 3.5 months between 18 September or 1 Tishri and 29 December, so remember or any later date sufficiently ahead of Herod's death, allows ample time for all that narrative in Luke 2, Yeshua's birth and circumcision, and Matthew chapter 2, the visitation of the astrologers, followed by the slaughter of the innocents, all to play out, along with all those other things that were mentioned before that Herod had to do before he died. All of which makes Dionysius Exiguus, a scholar who lived in Rome in the 6th century, correct as to the date of Yeshua, well, at least the year of Yeshua's birth. So I think our calendars are actually right. And based on all of the above, I reckon that Jesus was probably born about 18 September 1 BCE, 1 Tishri, the start of the year, which equates to 16 September in our calendar. Now, there's a few questions about the timing of the events in Revelation. We have the child being caught up to heaven and the woman being taken off into the desert, but they're not specified as being in a chronological order. There's no then between them. So we have the woman led into the wilderness where she was, where she has a place prepared for her by God, where she's to be nourished by, or the Greek text says where they nourished her. We don't know who the they are, for 1,260 days. So that's a bit over 3.5 years. In 1214, the woman referred to there is given the wings, two wings of great eagle, so that she might fly into the wilderness for a time and times and half a time. In other words, 3.5 years. Well, 1,260 days, as Robert has spoken before, is a couple of weeks longer than 3.5 years. So we're not sure that verse 14 is even referring necessarily to the same woman. One of the issues with all of this apocalyptic literature is that the same symbolism can refer to multiple different things. But in this case, I'm just showing you how it might be applied to working out when Jesus was born and the consequences of that. Thank you. Any questions? No, never got to 2 AD, got to 2 BC, which would be when the ministry finished.
Yeah, so it sounded like
Zechariah's ministry.
Yeah, so there was so much data in it, or detail, that I was getting lost in it all.
Okay, yeah, there is a lot in there, a lot of pieces that have to all be fitted together, interlocked to...
Good old Virgo never stands on her feet.
Yeah, it should be the right way up down here.
So I've always had a bit of an interest in the astronomy side of things. So how do they date back to these lunar eclipses and things? Are there records of these eclipses in the ancient writings?
Not only are there records, but we can actually calculate.
Right, so there is calculation that works.
Yes, well, the astronomy program I work, you can put in any date you want, going backwards and forwards, right? And it will show you what's going on with the state of the sky for those dates, minute by minute.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's amazing. And I've always had this understanding that that every mathematical thing, every physics thing that we have in our universe is already there, that God created, and he just simply orchestrates how things work out and how time plays out and things like that. And I think it's just amazing that he would bring these things together. And that, you know, what does it say, that the Messiah was born at the right time, at that time, that was all specific. None of this is happenstance or anything.
Yes,
And
well,
I appreciate your work and research in that. Thanks, Paul.
And Paul does have this written down on a paper, so for further study as well. Yeah, because I think that might help.
Just some clarification. When you're saying that maybe they're out by 4 years, and then at the end of your sermon just then, you said, no, I don't think it was. It was actually the correct. Is that what you were saying? So I got confused there, because when you're talking about how saying our calendar was out by 4 years, and then you went, no, I think with the last guy, the Roman dude.
Dionysius is Exodus.
Yeah, that dude. You said no with what he said in calculations, that you actually don't think he was off by 4 years. Can I just get clarification on that?
Right. When Dionysius did the calculation, right, he worked out the calendar to give us the current calendar that we have. Okay, so so he says effectively Jesus was born in 1 BC. There's no year 0, right? But the issue with the 4 BC, right, is going from other records where Herod was assumed to have died in 4 BCE, right? And if Jesus was going to be born while Herod was alive, he can't have been born after that, right? And so people said, oh, the calendar's got to be wrong. Right? But what it appears is that Herod's reign officially ended in 4 BCE, not with his death, but with his fall from grace. Right? He didn't actually die till 1 BCE, or even 1 AD.
I'll go here, and then here, and then...
Yeah, I actually appreciate what you said. I know with astronomy, with astrology, I mean, God has astronomy, but it actually got counterfeited by Satan, because I know that people for centuries or thousands of years travelled by the stars and all that type of stuff, and navigation and all that. And I know where the 3 wise men actually got their signs and things like that. So I'm led to believe they were magi. They were actually like people that actually study the stars or whatever. Whether I'm correct or not, I'm not sure about that. But I do know that the Jewish culture, they go by the moon cycles and things like that. And I also know that they look at supermoons and things happen at supermoons and all sorts of moons and all that type of stuff. So they do look at that. I do understand what you're saying with, it's in Virgo and all that type of stuff. The only thing that I'm thinking about myself is when Revelation was writ was actually after the event, and I know what happens in the scriptures, what has once been before happens again. And I wonder whether that's because Revelation is, to me, God revealing himself and, sort of aware that this has happened before. I wonder whether that's still a future event. Well, the signs of the woman clothed with the sun, I mean, could be a similar event, because you had the woman which gave birth, but now this is, to me, could possibly be a movement of God. The woman giving birth is, to me, it's the spirit of Yeshua, the Holy Spirit giving an outpouring or something like that. That symbolically, a dragon represents, to me, something's quite evil. And I know there are countries that use dragons and all sorts of things. I'm just wondering whether this could be something not now, but a super event. I know that there's lots of, super moons around and all that type of stuff. And I know certain feast days with the Jewish calendar, there's certain woes and all sorts of things. And if you look further into Revelations, it talks about certain signs or woes to come. And I wonder whether this one, with the virgin, the woman dressed, with, the moon and the, stars under her feet and that, whether that could be also a future event. Happened before, but, what's happened before happens again.
Possibly so, but I'd point out that all of the options that have been discussed, whether it's the church, whether the woman is the church or Israel or the mother of Jesus, regardless, they are all starting back at a time before this book was written. Right? And the ancient Jews wouldn't have been concerned with supermoons and that sort of stuff. The concept didn't exist. It's a very modern notion.
Is it a sign? Do you think that it's a sign that might happen again? So the Virgo sign or symbol.
It's difficult to imagine that it's going to happen again because this woman is to give birth to a male child who is going to rule the earth with a rod of iron. That can only be one particular individual. And it's happened, folks. It's happened.
So we're talking the timestamp of you're looking at when is Yeshua born.
Well,
yeah,
that's a fixed point for this part of the book of Revelation, right? That part, whichever model you use, had already happened before John had his revelation.
My question, it's related to a couple of points. So if I was to get the first point, it sounded like looking at Herod's death, you kind of came to the year 1 BC, sometime between, like the 29th of December, which is the previous year, to 29th, so the end of March. And that was 1 BC, and that was looking at it as a window of the Messiah's birth. Is that right?
Yeah.
But then the other point, when you're looking at the stars as the sign, I saw you get to a different date being in September 1 BCE, so about 6 months later. Was that, if I'm clarifying, is that so what the historical account sort of points you to a window between December and March, but then the stars account gets you to a window, or not a window, but a period in around 16th or 18th of September?
Well, the question we need to work out is when Herod died, right? Josephus tells us that it was between a lunar eclipse and the following Passover, right? And there's only really 3 candidate dates, the one in 4 BCE and 2 in 1 BCE. One on the 10th of January, one on the 29th of December. And the chart that I put up showed what the state of the sky was in September 1 BCE, right? Which is when Yeshua might have been born. Yep. Well, you work back from Herod's death to when Yeshua might have been born, right? We know he had to be born before Herod died, right? And he could have been born before that lunar eclipse, right, which was in December, right? And all I'm saying is that the nearest event that fits is the September new moon.
Okay, just 2 things. The one is that we must just clear up that I think a lot of us think that looking at something like Virgo is astrology, but to just point out that if you could explain that was there a lot long before.
In the 1st century, there was no distinction between astrology and astronomy, right? The occultic practices we know now that have been separated out, right? Yes, that was all mixed in together, right? This is in what you might call a pre-scientific age, but nonetheless, they had worked out the science of the movement of the stars and planets. And so when the Magi came to Jerusalem, we've seen his star when we're back in the east. We don't know what that star was. Could have been a supernova, could have been a comet. We just don't know. But there was something that brought them to Jerusalem.
The other question was, in Luke it says, the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary in the 6th month. Does that give us a very clear idea that if she fell pregnant in the 6th month, what was the 6th month in the Jewish calendar then?
It was the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy.
Oh, not the 6th month of the year.
No.
Ah, I thought we were going to get closer to a date.
No. And then on the clarity between astrology and astronomy, it's all about worship, right? Do we
Yes.
worship the stars or do we worship the creator of the stars? Right, yeah. Do we worship the rainbow or the creator of the rainbow? Yes, over there.
Now you know what it's right, Law on it.
Sorry, I couldn't follow most of the academic thing, but you said Herod the Great died 4 BCE,
No,
right?
his reign ended in 4 BCE.
Didn't
right.
he die 4 BCE?
Well, that's what I'm questioning, whether he actually died in 4 BCE. What we know is he fell from grace that year, right, and his reign ended that year.
Mm.
Right? But there's no historical evidence that that's when he actually died, right? And the next people that came along, right, Antipas and Archelaus and Philip, right, the earliest coins for them, right, they don't date them from the first year of their reigns, they only date them to the 5th year of their reigns, which suggests that Herod was still around for the first 4 years.
So that's why when the wise men came, they came to the person in power and they asked where the Messiah, and Herod was still there.
Yes.
And you reckon Jesus was born 1 CE? Not zero.
There's no year zero.
No, yes.
Yeah, I know it sounds strange to say that Yeshua was born in the year before Yeshua, but
Yeah, I know. That's always the case whenever we're making these discussions.
that's only because our calendars have been calculated to start on 1 January, whereas if we were using the Hebrew calendar, we wouldn't have a problem. Rosh Hashanah.
Mhm. All right, any other questions? Yep. One.
So what you're saying is there was 1 BC and then it became 1 AD?
On the following 1st of January.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
there was only
it goes from
September,
goes from
October,
1
November,
BC.
December, only 3 months, and then you go into 1 AD.
Yeah, that is correct. It goes from 1 BC to 1
Yeah, we go straight from 1 BCE to 1 CE with no zero in between.
Yeah, I've just got a basic question about Herod's reign didn't end. Oh, sorry, his reign ended 4 years before, 1 BC. Yeah, so in what sense was he still reigning for the events of?
Sorry. Can you hold the mic? Please?
Sorry. Yes, it's just that, like in Luke, Herod is described as having commanded this and done that. You're saying, yeah, but he wasn't really reigning. So I'm just wondering what the difference is between his reign had ended, but he was still the king, or not the king.
Yeah, so it's giving that clarity between him falling from grace and him dying.
Yeah.
So he was, during the time that he fell from grace and he died, was he really still in charge?
He was still the effective ruler, although Josephus refers to Antipas, as having long exercised effective control. So Herod was still around. Now, pardon? Yeah. He was Herod the Great's successor.
So even though he fell from grace from the emperor's perspective, he was still effectively the king. Nobody dared to oppose him, even though Antipas was kind of technically the figurehead.
Yeah. Well, he might have just delegated it to Antipas, or because they couldn't have effectively take over until he was dead.
But could I just, the point about somebody ordered the babies to be killed. So, like, that's right, isn't it? And is that what happened in 1 BC? So he ordered that, or like, couldn't he have been overruled? Or, you know what I mean? I'm still not saying that he was either in power or he wasn't in power, sort of thing, if you understand what I mean.
It would have been very risky for any of
Yeah.
his sons, given that he'd already been known to execute multiple sons that had displeased him, to say, no, we're kicking you out.
So yeah, and this is what ends up being, this is the link for the dating is Herod, because we look in the scriptures, we know it was Herod the Great that it's referring to when it's talking about the birth of Yeshua. And then, the big question is, so then when does Herod die? Obviously, if Herod's the one who's there at Yeshua, alive during Yeshua's birth, then we have to try and say, okay, when did Herod die? When did he fall from power? And so there's all the questions about the dating fall into that. Do you?
Yeah, we also know that, Yochanan the Immerser, John the Baptist, his ministry began in the 15th year of Tiberius, which we know was about 29 CE. Right? So if Luke is correct about Jesus being 30 years old, as was commonly understood, then he cannot have begun his ministry before then. Right? He can't have begun his ministry before 29. So if he's 30 years old at around 29, he can't have been born in 4 BCE.
Okay. It's just Matthew chapter 2. It talks about, of course, them having to flee to Egypt because of Herod and killing all the boys and the young boys in Bethlehem. And then Herod dies, it says in verse 19, and the angel told Joseph that they could leave Egypt. But when Joseph heard that Archelaus was king of Judea in place of his father, he became afraid, so that's why they went to Galilee in Nazareth. So, definitely dies. Yeshua's born before Herod dies, and Archelaus then becomes king in his father's place. I guess I'm still trying to.
Okay, so for further detail, yes? One.
I just now realized what you were meaning before when, like, I was thinking that your 2 dates that you were pointing out, like, it seemed like one was between December and March and the other one was like months later, but it's actually that you're talking about December of that year, and it's before he died between December and March of that year.
But between December 1 BCE and March 1 CE.
Yes, yeah, because the dates are so similar, it sounded so. Yes,
Not
so
going the other way.
you're saying that Jesus was likely born before that, while he was still technically reigning. So the dates, because the dates seemed like they were out of sync, and I was like, yeah.
That's okay.
Okay, so for further study, we will add a link for Paul's teaching to the weekly email, and so you can go through it. He has all, as a good scholar, he has all the links to all the references in Josephus and all the other commentaries. A chart. They want a date chart. Ah, yes, a timeline chart. So he will work on that with his own paper, and I'll leave that to. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Paul.